All right, it's Richard Southern here with Dan Kelly from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Dan, we've gotten the news the Ford government is extending the stay-at-home order for Toronto and for York, and they say, hey, listen, the local officers of health, they want to see that. You have an issue with that though when it comes to business, right?
Look, the job of a premier is not simply to take one-sided information from a set of officials. It's also to try to ensure that there is some recognition of the economic effects of these decisions. Uh, there has been an absolute abdication of responsibility on the part of the premier to local officials. Essentially, Eileen de Villa is now the premier of Ontario, calling all of the shots. It is absolutely shocking to me that the personal perspective or views of one official can basically determine the future, the very livelihood of thousands and thousands of business owners.
Dan,
In
we
fact,
all care about business. We all care about business,
yeah,
but the virus doesn't. Who else, except for a doctor, should we be listening to right now?
well, I would agree if the doctors were unanimous on this in this view, but there are public health officials in every single province of the country. There are public health officials in every single region of Ontario who have reached different
In
conclusions.
Ontario?
In Ontario, infection rates in the city of Toronto are lower than they are in Peel, and Peel is moving into the red zone with the full advice and permission of the chief medical officer in Peel, who is asking for some breathing room for small businesses. Dr. Kurji has reached an entirely different conclusion, even though there are higher rates of infection in our neighboring area. So this isn't by any means science or uniform views and opinions on the part of the medical community. This is the view of a chief medical officer of health in Toronto, her perspective of this, which needs to be considered, but is not the only piece of evidence that should determine whether or not a business is allowed to succeed or fail. There was never a discussion given about opening up Toronto and Peel anyway. This was not about reopening. The only sector of the economy that was going to be allowed to open a tiny bit was the retail sector. Restaurants were to remain closed, hair salons, nail salons to remain closed, uh, um, gyms were to remain closed. Retail was the only sector that was to be allowed to open as of Monday, and now they have been slammed shut at least till March the 8th or 9th. And even at that, I have no confidence that those dates will come and businesses will be allowed to
But
reopen.
Dan, whether you agree with it or not, I mean, the doctors, they're doing this with the right intention in mind. I mean, we're not medical experts; they are, and they think this is what needs to happen.
Yeah. But for some reason in the city of Toronto, we believe that the virus operates entirely differently here than in jurisdictions around the world. British Columbia, with one of the most world-renowned medical offices of health, never once shut down the retail community, met with the business community, talked to them about ways that they should be changing their operations to accommodate that. We're not even able to get a meeting with Eileen de Villa to ask some questions.
No,
If
but
this
why
was
should she? She shouldn't be meeting with business leaders. I don't
Of
think,
course she
Dan.
should. Of course she should. Medical officers from coast to coast have been meeting with their business community, requesting meetings to try to urge them to take action and in order to keep COVID numbers down, except in the city of Toronto. The decisions that have been made here are at odds with decisions that have been made in consultation with medical officers of health from coast to coast in Canada. Toronto has the longest lockdown in North America, despite the fact that Toronto's numbers are well lower most other jurisdictions, certainly than other Canadian jurisdictions. We seem to think that all of that should be forgotten.
What type of damage will another? Let's say we do move into the red zone in 2 weeks. Okay, what type of damage is an extra 2 weeks going to do to business, Dan?
Every single day, every single hour that a business remains closed, more and more of the entrepreneurs are making the decision to hang up their keys forever. They're closing their doors. They can't withstand the damage that has been done. Businesses, just in this most recent lockdown, retail stores will have been closed for over 100 straight days by the time March 9th happens. Indoor dining will have been closed for 150 days, dramatically longer than any other jurisdiction in the country, with no ends in sight. How the premier thinks that these businesses are going to be able to survive, I just don't know.
These grants, they're not enough that the province is offering, Dan, the $20,000?
The province has been incredibly stingy with the economic supports. Most provinces have done dramatically more than the province of Ontario. The Premier Ford, the entire Ontario government has had the worst handling of the economic effects of COVID-19 of any province in the country. The NDP in British Columbia has done a dramatically better job managing the economy through the pandemic, allowing businesses to safely stay open. Ontario has taken a completely different approach, locking down everything that moves, even though there is no evidence to suggest that it is the business activity that is causing COVID to spread. The reason the businesses are closed, and the government's even admitting this, is to send a message to the public to stay home. Well, if your business, your future, your home is in jeopardy, is falling apart as a result of a decision to send a message to somebody else, you can understand why businesses are feeling so angry at the Ford government.
Are you angry at the Ford government?
Absolutely. They have not been listening, sticking their head in the sands. They certainly have been talking to us, but I can tell you that if there's a personal perspective of a medical officer of health, they forget anything else. This is something that needs to be managed. Are we going to lock down the business community until vaccines are in place in September? We're not going to have Ontarians are not going to have jobs to come back to because their employers will be out of business.
So what do you want to say to the Premier right now if he's listening, Dan?
The Premier needs to start listening to a broader cross-section of views than simply implementing the decisions of a local official that has had no dialogue, no discussion with anyone. That's just deeply unfair. The job of a Premier is to ensure that all perspectives are heard, that we manage our way through the COVID emergency, and at the very least, that there are a variety of medical opinions that are factored into this decision. But look, the Toronto and York decisions is bizarre to me. The York Medical Officer of Health said open up with higher numbers, they opened up. The Toronto medical officer said with lower numbers, close her down, the province closed her down. This isn't, the Premier is essentially abdicating responsibilities and allowing local officials to make the decision as to whether or not businesses survive or not.
I think they're worried about the variant, right? Which can spread really quickly. Obviously, Toronto's more dense. We got more of the variant here. I think that's probably the concern, though, Dan.
Sure, we have variant here, but that exists elsewhere in the country as well. For example, the variant existed in the UK first, but cases have come down by 2/3 in the UK.
Well, they had a strict lockdown as well.
Where they did have strict lockdowns,
and it worked. It worked, right?
And I got to tell you, the Premier was proudly saying that Ontario was keeping an emergency brake in place. Well, to use a brake effectively, you actually have to start the engine, and that didn't happen yet. So we've pulled the brake before we've even turned the key. I don't get it.
Dan, I appreciate your time. You great points as always, and thanks for doing this, my friend.
Not at all. Anytime.